Welcome to the Unshielded podcast, where we explore the importance of rational privacy through the application of data protection and zero-knowledge technology. Welcome to the Unshielded podcast, live here in London at the Midnight Summit. I am joined here today by Ian Horne, who is not only our MC for the week, but also author of Why DeFi Matters. Thanks for joining us, Ian.
Hey, thank you, Jason. Good to be here. And if you needed proof that we're in London, here is a unique and honest English accent. Hello. Hi.
Absolutely. Well, thanks you for joining us. I think you're a master of arms, a master of events. You've had some great experiences and have been doing quite a few rounds here in London for, we had just recent London Blockchain Week and FinTech Fringe Festival. So excited to have you participating with us. If people haven't met you and haven't seen you, maybe in the London area, as they join us globally, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
For sure. I mean, firstly, I'm an event MC, and that intro you gave me was better than one I gave myself today. But what I do is I'm currently working independently. I'm the author of a book called Why DeFi Matters, as you mentioned, which was a kind of deep dive into the rise of blockchain and smart contracts in finance. And rather than looking at, line goes up, line goes down, the book was all about explaining how DeFi is inspiring genuine change in the financial system. I'm known for a handful of things. I was formerly the head of content at Money 2020 Europe. So I used to program the biggest kind of fintech agenda in Europe every single year, which was a great event, great experience. I've also been a writer for several years. So before working at Money 2020, I was with a company called Citywire, where I led a networking team for the financial advice and wealth management market in the UK. But also the thing that kind of sparked my career going in the direction it was that I launched a kind of brand called Citywire Wealth Tech, which was a series of events, newsletters, and podcasts. So that, in a nutshell, is what I do. But generally speaking, I write, I talk, I pull faces on stage, and that's kind of what I do.
That's awesome. And so I think it's great to have you here. I've seen you at multiple events so far. You do a great job of looking through the viewer's eyes and talking about the expertise of what's being shared on stage. You did a great job on a lot of our panels and keynotes, kind of recapping for the folks. So thinking back of the last 2 days and how we've brought industry leaders, blockchain founders, privacy advocates together, what are some of the things that you felt resonated not only with you, but with the audience, and things that probably have some resonance and longevity in the discussion as we go forward?
Oh, definitely. There were loads of recurring themes. And one thing you mentioned there is the kind of notes I give between each session. So quick insight into the mind of an MC here. When I'm listening to the sessions, what I like to do is literally scribble notes on what's going on, because you get to listen to thought leaders. I know that obviously you're thinking about what you're going to say on stage when you go up next. But for me, one of the most important things that you can do is actually kind of rationalize and condense the message that's been delivered by a panel or a keynote. So that's what I try and do. So sadly, it's buried away in my bag rather than on this table right now. But I do have a book kind of half full already of notes from these sessions we've had over the last 2 days. A number of things kept coming up. I mean, obviously, the event was all based around rational privacy and selective disclosure of information, which for me is just a hugely important topic. We can talk about that for hours, I'm sure, but there are certain things associated with that I found really interesting. I think one is the notion of trust. Like, for instance, if people are going to build protocols that are going to help us get towards a better position for online privacy, people actually need to trust these protocols. There's all sorts of things that feed into that. Partly it's UX. Partly when people are using a new tool in DeFi, it needs to actually make sense. It needs to be something that people always say that your grandparents could use, right? Which is maybe, a lot of grandparents are very tech literate these days, but you know what I mean. The other part of it is, speaking in really plain language about what you're delivering for people rather than confusing the hell out of them, because the work that we do is confusing as hell. So there is something to be said for that. And again, also, people aren't familiar with the names and the brands in Web3 just yet. So we're a long way from that. There are a few other things I think kept coming up as well. I mean, the importance of ecosystem. Towards the end today, one thing we were talking about was the size of Midnight's ecosystem and the amount of partners within that. That has really practical benefits. If you're talking about things like liquidity, if you're talking about things like fragmentation of data and the ability to make things interoperable, there I am using horrible words that I'm telling people not to use. But, that kind of stuff is really, really important and really helpful. It also means that when you kind of pull together, that is very much more the ethos of Web3, isn't it? Collaboration, coming together and creating systems that work for people rather than centralized power structures that make someone loads of money. So there are a number of things that kept coming up. I mean, those ones spring to mind. I'm sure as we talk more, I'll be able to think of several more. I mean, there are also so many good, specific keynotes, but I'm sure we'll go into those.
Yeah. No, I think I agree. The biggest thing in regards to the community ecosystem piece is that these people have bought in. They understand that whether it is the novel technology, whether it's the need for privacy and a technology that compromised on it from the get-go with blockchain, but is that since they have a good understanding of what it is, they see the potential in it. They see the need for it. And like you said, though, and I think over the course of the last couple of days, we talked the complexity of actually making that privacy enabling technology happen. And because it is complex, how do you simplify not only the terms of explaining it, but simplify the ease of how it gets implemented?
Yeah, I think sometimes with that, we're asking ourselves the wrong question, because I've been thinking about this a lot. The education piece is something that has also come out. And it's not just been on stage, it's been conversations with people across the show. I almost think there are different ways of looking at it. So education for me is really crucial when we're talking about regulators, lawmakers, when we're talking about other businesses that can really help support the ecosystem. And governments, the people that need to be educated actually aren't necessarily the end users. And I think we sometimes miss a trick there, where possibly educating the wrong people. Ultimately, when people are using a tool, if it's the end user, they almost need to not know that it exists. If it's privacy, for instance, okay, your inspiration for using it might be that you're worried about your data being leaked or used by the wrong people or being monetized by the wrong people. But even then, as much as people do care about privacy when you ask about it, let's look at how people have generally treated their privacy. The general public, myself included, has pretty much waived their privacy rights for the sake of convenience and access to tools and products online. They've waived it in favor of personalization of products, be they financial or otherwise. So honestly, I think when it comes to education, we need to educate people that can help support and create the ecosystem. When it comes to the end user, there's this idea that they need to know what tokenized investments are. They don't. I don't think they do. But I think they do need to understand the value add to them and the benefit. And also perhaps if there is a risk involved, yes, they need to know about that. But again, I'm speaking more towards when I say things about knowing the risk, that's more like a risky financial product than a generalized blockchain kind of application.
No, but I think it's a good transition into, again, like why DeFi matters, coming back to your book and things that you've been kind of putting in the foundation of your speaking MC pieces. That what are like some of those maybe TradFi integrations that you're starting to see be accepted by that audience, that are maybe normal to the blockchain audience, that is part of integral DeFi, but you're seeing that trend of, okay, the risk is a little bit less now, whether it be because of regulation, because technology is more savvy, or because the audibility and privacy layer that is starting to come into actual realization is becoming available for them. So what are some of those trends that you think are happening?
For sure. I mean, when it comes to regulatory clarity, I think the areas that we're stronger on are areas where people really understand what's being done. And even then, we don't have it universally. When we're speaking in the UK, the obvious example I would point out in relation to this topic is stablecoins. And as we know, the UK is still figuring out what to do with that, whereas the US has a much more clear path now with the Genius Act. So if we're looking at applications where, the TradFi, DeFi worlds emerging, stablecoins are the obvious one. I mean, speaking to my former role from 2 years ago at Money 2020, I programmed, actually maybe 3 years ago now, I programmed the crypto summit, and obviously it was in the wake of the FTX collapse. And the things people said to me during that time were fascinating. Some people were saying, why have you programmed the crypto summit? This thing's dead. Other people, actually it was a member of the Midnight ecosystem said this to me, was like, all these cross-border companies don't know we're coming for them. And that was quite funny to me, just seeing that strong contrast in bullish and bearish on this. The other side, of course, is the real world assets. And the obvious area we're seeing movement is in like credit, or it's in, credit is the obvious one. Yeah, you're going to see it to some point, equities as well. And in time, we'll probably see more popularization of physical assets, or even things like, you see like gold and wine investments being tokenized. So that's an obvious route forward. I think it goes much further than this, though. I think the challenge that we have, and the challenge is we're marrying up the movement of money and the movement of assets, which obviously often happens off chain, especially when it's something physical being talked about, with this kind of parallel ecosystem that we're building on top of it. And sometimes those things don't quite marry up. And it will take time to make things synchronize and to, create the kind of interoperability between different assets and, ledgers to make all of this move smoothly. But I think what we're moving towards is a more agile financial system that allows us to use tokenized assets, be it money or be it something more physical, in different ways. And I think that will add liquidity to the financial system. I think it will add, ways of having collateral and credit worthiness. It goes further than that, but I mean, it's already getting complicated, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think you bring up a good point in regards to there is appetite. There are already kind of ways that folks are thinking about how these get applied, but it is not. It's the institutions that are looking for that opportunity, and to the retail customer, they could care less if it's on a blockchain or
exactly. Yeah.
So as long as they have access to that, they feel that it's secure. So what do you feel like, maybe in your opinion, as these financial institutions start to bring in more tokenized assets, more digital DeFi financial products, is there a level of education that they need to do their customer? Or if they do it well from an innovation standpoint and access standpoint, that it's just a seamless experience that the retail user can have?
I think if it's happening through kind of regulated systems, then you want it to be comparable to what we already have, ultimately. Every now and then when you send money to someone, it's like, is this a scam? That's the kind of level of kind of friction that I think we need. I think when you start adding in extra steps, it assumes that you're dealing with a sophisticated investor or whoever else, which makes it trickier. So I would hope that we can create these things without creating additional steps beyond what we already have. Often what we're doing is very similar to what TradFi is doing anyway in terms of the end result. And again, like you say, it's not always about people knowing about blockchain. I don't need to know about every single thing. And again, to speak to what I was talking about earlier about changing the financial system, again, like I'm talking it very much in a blockchain podcast kind of manner. The reality is, for the end user, stablecoin payments, I want quicker, more efficient, cost-effective cross-border payments. You want better, balance sheet management for companies. You want all this kind of stuff. When it comes to tokenized assets, we can start talking about investments in whatever way we want. But the reality is, you'll be able to do more and move more effectively the things that you own. It doesn't really need to be more complicated than that for the end user.
Absolutely. And I think there's many of the audience that may not have that as a pain point too. And I think that's the other thing to consider is your experience with financial institutions and banking might be a very at ease experience. You're able to pass money from a payer to a payee very easily, from a family member to another very easily. Others around the world, though, if they're globally diverse, they have family in all different parts of the globe, that might not be as easy for them.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these solutions that have come into play from DeFi and payment standpoint, like you said, the cross-border payments, people are coming for those. Like, I think, again, you're disrupting a very large legacy industry of cross-border payments that have been doing that brick and mortar horse and carriage since the 1900s, but like a MoneyGram has been around forever. But they're seeing the I know they're getting into blockchain. They're seeing the capabilities of same day reconciliation, lower fees to their customers, and those are the things that this technology has pushed them to think about, to the point where that becomes almost the new norm. Maybe not fully implemented yet, but is something that you start to see that trend happening.
Definitely. Yeah, you can see traditional finance moving quickly to adopt in particular stable coins, but also other forms of digital assets. I mean, even look at like a neobank like Revolut. They've been very quick to try and adopt digital assets, and that's the direction of the future. Those that move forward and compete in the future will be using this technology. They might not be talking about it quite as bullishly as we used to back in the day, but they will absolutely be facilitating it. I think another thing you touched upon there that actually it merits discussing, and is something that came up constantly when I was writing Why DeFi Matters, is people are very stuck in their own perspective. It's easy for you or I to talk about the financial system. You're American, I'm English. Generally speaking, throughout our lives, the financial system has more or less worked for us. We can complain about things, and there are obviously flaws with it, as unequal, very unequal distributions of wealth. The housing market isn't great. There's a number of problems, and at the same time, generally speaking, our concerns are not that desperate. And I think when we look at how people relate to DeFi and how, again, the quicker, more efficient cross-border movement of money, or the ability to move things on chain, move lending on chain, move assets on chain, this can actually all be very transformative for people that are struggling with access to the financial system, wherever they're based. So I think that is another thing. When people analyze this, especially when people are critical, and people often approach it with that stigma, they're often doing it from quite a westernized lens because they see people kind of gambling on meme coins, they see them gambling on Bitcoin, and that perhaps is grating to them. But actually, when we look at the innovation that's going on, and the Midnight Summit is a prime example of that, there's actually some really serious and very cool stuff happening here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great to hear stories of the partners, developers, and just even the ideas. Many of the folks here have already been participating in the Midnight ecosystem. They've started to explore those ideas, have started to put life into those ideas, and coming here to express those and start to share those has been, very inspirational and exciting to see where that's going to end up. And I think, again, so a lot of what we talked about here at the event is around privacy. So one of the things I always get your folks' perspective on is, especially yours, coming a little bit more of how DeFi and TradFi are kind of merging. Do you feel like with some of the trends that are happening, is it a response maybe to have privacy and identity as a consideration because of a retail demand? Or are you finding that the innovation is driving the maybe enterprise technology considerations, and then it just becomes more of a seamless integration of privacy into an existing, user experience?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I could predict that very well, honestly, but I think best to admit your limitations. But on the institutional side, I think one of the most fascinating things we heard about over the last few days was the very obvious problem when large institutions are trying to move big amounts of money, or money that might disclose that they're making a strategic play. If you move that on a transparent blockchain, obviously you then lose your information advantage, and people can audit what you're doing. People might find all sorts of other ways to kind of sabotage what you're working on. So privacy is massive there. And I do actually, the bit of your question I can answer is I do see privacy as an unlock for institutional money movement, and it can help move more money and assets onto blockchain for sure. On the retail side of things, it's really hard to predict, because I think when we speak about retail, we're also talking about culture. We're talking about people's trust in financial ecosystems or trust in big tech and so on. I think more needs to happen than just kind of commercial movements to get people on board. In some places, for instance, just look at the responses to CBDCs. Some nations have rolled them out and they're actively working. Other nations, they're doing the whole let's discuss it for 5 or 6 years and not necessarily actually run anything. But there's also a lot of objection to it wherever you are. I think people are generally concerned about privacy, but to loop back to something I said right at the start, we've all kind of given up our privacy rights. And unless some kind of movement kind of happens to awaken people to that and make them care about it, I don't know if like the retail kind of thing happens, except of course if it just gets built into the system and it's just privacy by selective disclosure as default, which would be nice.
I think it's interesting. There's almost a parallel with both the technology innovation, let's say blockchain, where blockchain gave transparency to have a trustlessness to be able to have an understanding of these are the actual things that are working within a system, whether it be financial or not. But it did compromise on that privacy. You had full transparency in order to make that happen. I think as you saw that innovation happen, you also saw a gravitation of innovation from a retail perspective to convenience. So they were almost, I think the retail audiences started to compromise their own sense of privacy to say, I'm willing to give up some of this control for more convenience.
Yeah.
And I think potentially we're at a precipice. I don't know if you agree, but we're at a precipice now where we have so many data leaks. We have our digital selves so spread thin on all these different interactions that we have, where there's almost a sense of privacy does matter to me, but I have no idea how to reclaim that.
Yeah, there's a feeling of powerlessness, isn't there? I think Max Schrems' keynote earlier, and really highlighted this. The idea that if you want to read news that's paywalled, you have the classic: do you pay for a subscription or do you kind of like waive your privacy rights to read it? I mean, as a they have to at least see your cookies and all the rest. That's really fascinating, because in the end, when you get to that situation, often you're so keen to read the piece that you're like, oh, okay. And then you're kind of reluctantly accepting that you can be kind of tracked. It happens in other things. Something that Max said that I thought was probably actually more powerful was about, by participating in e-commerce, which we pretty much all do, you essentially accept that your information is going to be stored by someone, and therefore you're at risk of a data breach. So there is a real issue there. And as you say, perhaps there is a precipice, because we're kind of being put in situations constantly where if you don't commit to having your data be vulnerable, you're missing out, you're kept out of the loop. And that could be your ability to buy things online, which is pretty massive. Your ability to inform yourself, which is really important. And yes, it's done in the name of protecting journalism. But I mean, is that a good enough thing? Well, I think it's a really important thing, but you know what I mean. It shouldn't have to come at the expense of privacy.
Right, exactly. So, that expense of privacy, I think, is something that we harp on. We want to be able to, at midnight, empower folks with choice, with control, to be able to feel like they're no longer powerless, to be able to manage their data online. And so, if you are private by default, and entities are allowed to have selective disclosure, and your data is not going directly on chain, you have some things built in inherently in the system that allows for you to, again, think about convenience. How that gets built in the UX, we'll still see. But I think the convenience of, if the infrastructure is there to say, I'm private by default and I get to disclose when and who I want to disclose to, that is very, very powerful.
Absolutely. Things you're saying really feed into another common theme that kept coming out, which was the perception of privacy. And that is relevant. That is perhaps a bit where we can educate people more broadly, because we tend to associate privacy with secrecy, as several other panelists said. And then we tend to associate secrecy with nefarious action, especially, and I hate to say it, because I think Web3 is often held to a higher standard, and crypto and DeFi are held to a particularly high standard on these things. And also there have been some high profile issues, let's not lie. When people hear about privacy, they're thinking, what are you hiding? Is there something wrong? And they're also thinking, why are we hearing this from blockchain people? What do you mean? So I think the education part we need to do, perhaps a bit that is achievable, is actually to sell people, people on what privacy really means, on rational privacy, on selective disclosure, on how privacy is a spectrum, and it's also a kind of contextual thing. It's not like a default, everything should be private or nothing should be private. I think that kind of understanding is really needed. And yeah, there's a bit of a stigma to tackle here. And I think in a way that may be where the TradFi element comes in a bit as well. It might be partnerships with people who ultimately are dealing with who have the relationship with the end user. That doesn't mean that Web3 can't take that space either, or DeFi can't take that space, but the public probably trusts, as a general rule, old-fashioned banks a little bit more.
And the trust, I think that's a big thing. So I think very much so, where I think consistently I have heard over the last couple of days where privacy is not as much of a feature as it provide a sense of trust. So I think that comes into play where, you're not putting privacy in as a feature, you're putting it as an experience so that folks can understand whatever their interaction is, whether it's directly with a blockchain network, or if it is with a Dapper app that is utilizing the network, they feel that they can trust that experience. So I may put you on the spot here.
Okay.
You've heard every single panel, every single keynote over the last 2 days. We had the theme in helping define what is rational privacy. So as we talk about education around privacy, of all the things that you heard this week, I'd love to hear kind of your explanation, your definition of rational privacy.
Yeah, for me, rational privacy is having disclosure when you need it, and transparency when you need it, and having privacy when you need it. It's all about having the right level of privacy in the right context. That is pretty much how I would describe it.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah. Bring an opportunity to say that it's not privacy all, but it's privacy by default. So I think that's a great way to think about it. And we appreciate everything you've done this past 2 days to help us bring this to the Midnight ecosystem, to the broader world, as we live streamed as well. So Ian Horne, thank you very much. Again, joined here on the Unshielded podcast with Ian Horne, author of Why DeFi Matters, and our MC for the Midnight Summit.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jason.
Awesome. Thank you.
If you found this episode valuable, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media for more insights on blockchain, decentralized finance, and the technologies shaping the future of Web3.